Hey everyone, so following my last video on coping with uncertainty during COVID-19, I had the opportunity to reconnect with one of my college friends, Andrew Cohen, who's an associate marriage and family therapist. He agreed to sit down with me on a Zoom call and I could pretty much pick his brain and ask him as many questions as I could think of. And he basically broke down his thoughts on the state of mental health right now, as well as gave us some really effective tips and just practical life tools to keep in mind. So just a little bit of background on Andrew before we dig in. He got his degree in counseling psychology and after that went on to work with survivors of domestic abuse. He's worked with young adults who struggle with depression and substance abuse. But what I think is super topical at this point is he specializes and has a passion for treating OCD and anxiety disorders. And just a small little side note, the quality of the Zoom meeting was less than stellar at certain points. This was my first time editing a recorded Zoom conference. But with all that said, I really hope you enjoy this very informative conversation with Andrew Cohen. Okay, so everyone, I'm actually sitting here today with Andrew Cohen, one of my old college friends. I actually met him. He was on my dorm floor of all places back at UCLA. And since then, he's gone on to be a pretty sweet mental health practitioner. He's an associate therapist at the moment and has a lot of cool specialties in his background. I know that I mentioned quite a bit of that in the intro, but yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself, Andrew, and I do have a ton of questions, man.
Perfect. I'm really happy to be here. It's nice to reconnect.
Yeah,
It's been
man.
a long time. Yeah, so I'm an associate marriage and family therapist. I specialize in the treatment of OCD and anxiety disorders. I've been out of grad school for about 2.5 years now, accruing my hours for licensure. Luckily just finished them and submitted them. So waiting to hear back about taking the test to be licensed.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm pumped. And then I work in private practice out in Westlake Village at a place called Engage. And I also work in West Los Angeles at a place called Renewed Freedom Center, where we treat OCD and anxiety disorders. So happy to be here
Safe to
today.
say my man's doing all right, man. Things are looking good, and you seem really happy, and is really what you, I mean, I know you were a psych major in college, so everything pretty much stuck to the plan at that point.
Yeah, it's been a journey, going to the community college and transferring over to
Yeah.
UCLA, enjoying those years with you guys and everyone on the sixth floor of Gardenia.
Yeah, yeah.
Some fun times.
Oh,
Some
for
very
sure.
fun times.
Different times.
Oh, very different times. And then, graduated, took a year off, just worked as a behavioral therapist for kids on the spectrum, and then went to grad school. Met my
That's,
fiance there. So
hey, man, everything worked out.
it seems to be that way.
Okay, so I'm really curious because I feel like right now is a very critical time to have a specialty such as anxiety and OCD. How do you feel? Like, do you feel like there's a spike in appointments right now, or sort of in that similar vein? Are people like seeking therapy for the very first time because of COVID-19, or what's the sort of spectrum like right now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. A lot of people are asking like, "Oh, you work in OCD, so are people like freaking out,
Yeah.
doing a whole bunch of cleaning compulsions and obsessing about having COVID?" And the answer is, it's not so black and white, because if people have already been in treatment for anxiety and OCD and have been through the correct treatment, like cognitive behavioral therapy and exposure and response prevention,
Mm.
they are really good at tolerating uncertainty. And obviously right now is an uncertain time. So for my patients who have been in treatment for a while and just talking to other clinicians of their patients, they're actually doing really well. For people who have anxiety disorders and OCD, it can be validating to be like, okay, now other people are kind of being able to understand my daily experience and just how tiring and exhausting it can be. There are an influx of new patients who you would say probably already have OCD or anxiety, and maybe it wasn't to the point of interfering with their lives so much. However, we know anxiety, depression, any sort of emotion gets amplified when there's other stressors going on, right? We can
Yes.
only, like, everyone has the ability to tolerate distress to a certain level, and adding outside stressors of this unknown that everyone's experiencing with COVID is going to make our ability to tolerate the distress go down. Being quarantined during this time and not having, the normalcy that we normally have, can lead to a lot of just kind of mentally spinning, going down the rabbit hole of worrying constantly. And yeah,
that sounds
tiring.
right on par.
Yeah, some people are lucky enough to have some sort of daily routine. Some people aren't, but continue to work, which is helpful. But if you're not lucky enough to have that, it's very, very easy to go down that rabbit hole.
I know, we kind of spoke about this earlier before we recorded, but you had mentioned something regarding how, a lot of the uncertainty and the anxiety that you experience from that is
Yeah.
sort of relative to this fight or flight response.
Yeah.
How do you feel like that's at play with regard to just processing the uncertainty right now?
A lot of people try to think their way out of anxiety. A lot of people try to think their way logically out of all what's happening. And it's really hard to do that when you're triggered in that fight or flight response.
Is there any logic that is associated with anxiety, or is it completely a gut response? Like, is there a practical reason for anxiety, or is this something we deal with?
Yeah, no, there definitely is a practical reason for anxiety. It is for survival, right?
Yeah.
You can think about anxiety in the fight or flight response like a fire alarm system. The fire alarm, when it's working well, it actually goes off and alerts you when there's danger so you can get out, run away and not burn in a fire. However, you can think of people who have anxiety disorders or obsessive compulsive disorders, anything like that. They have a faulty fight or flight response, a faulty fire alarm system that's really going off at times when it doesn't necessarily need to be going off. And that is where more of the issues come in. That's where, the excessive anxiety happens, the constantly going in and out of fight or flight. And a lot of people who experience that, have a lot of uncomfortable physical sensations a lot of times, panic attacks, heart palpitations, stomach issues, because the GI tract turns on and off a lot during the fight or flight.
So those physiological responses, is that like 10 out of 10 times someone that's having that type of anxiety will feel that physical response, or is it sort of less common?
Like a panic attack type response?
Like a panic attack, or like, like the concept of manifesting an illness because you're like thinking about it or stuff like that.
That's a really good question. Not all triggers are the same, right? Some people are like, let's use, for example, like someone who has contamination OCD, right?
Oof.
And they're really worried about—
It's probably like me right now.
And a lot of people are experiencing, similar things to that. Yeah. Really worried about, I touched this, my desk in my house. What if that had COVID on it? Oh my God, I got to go wash my hands, right? And you kind of get stuck in that cycle. So basically there could be things that they touch or are exposed to that necessarily don't give them like a huge anxiety reaction, right? We have our patients rank anxiety on like a 1 to 10 scale, okay? 10 being the highest, 1 being the lowest. And there's triggers that might put them at a 4 or a 5. And then there's other triggers that could put them at a 10. So like being coughed on by someone might put someone at a 10 versus just kind of touching a doorknob might put someone at a 6. So just kind of depending on the trigger, your fight or flight will react accordingly. And yeah, you can have those physiological sensations. And also another point you asked about like manifesting, like the physical. So people who have anxiety, OCD, panic disorder tend to be very hypersensitive to their physical sensations. So it's not uncommon to feel like a heart palpitation or feel like a shortness of breath. And their mind goes, oh my God, what the hell was that? And then that in itself triggers the anxiety, which triggers more of the fight or flight response. So you start feeling that sensation more. And then you start ruminating about that sensation.
It's like a chicken or the egg thing. Like which one happened first?
Exactly. So
dang. Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah. And if you're not aware of this, this is why people a lot of the time will end up in the emergency room thinking they're having a heart attack, when in reality they're having a panic attack.
Is it a heart rate thing? Like they legit feel like they can't breathe, or?
Yeah, because when there's a whole bunch of chemical reactions that happen, like adrenaline, norepinephrine's released. I'm not very well versed in all of
Dude,
the
yeah.
biology behind
Please,
it.
neither am I.
I was more of, what is it? Is it North Campus at UCLA? I think South
Yeah.
Campus is the
The science and math.
science folk. Yeah, psychology is a softer science.
Yeah,
We'll
we're
say.
like mid-campus.
Yeah. We'll say right in between that. But yeah.
You actually mentioned something, when we were texting the other day, that I hadn't heard it phrased in that way, but you mentioned something called a vicious anxiety cycle.
Yeah.
And I probably have some sort of cycle of my own. I know a lot of people, whether or not they associate with anxiety, would probably deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that entail, really, you feel like, this cycle of anxiety?
Yeah. So let me just like pull up a little thing because it's easy to have a visual,
Okay.
and then I'll talk about it. Can you see that?
I can. Okay.
All right, perfect. So the vicious anxiety cycle. So it's important to take into account that like fight or flight response, that evolutionary response with anxiety. Everyone experiences anxiety. We're seeing that more and more common right now, obviously, with COVID-19, more stressors and everything.
Yeah.
So this cycle starts with some sort of situation that usually triggers a thought. Say you're just sitting and you're just kind of hanging out at home, then all of a sudden you have a thought pop in your mind, God, when is this pandemic going to be over? Like, this is I'm feeling just cooped up. I'm feeling really uncomfortable. I need to get out. I want to see my friends, and what if I get sick? All of these thoughts pop up, right?
Yeah.
And that thought will lead us to experiencing emotions. Okay, now the emotion can be different for everyone. A lot of the times, especially with right now, it's usually anxiety, fear, discomfort, worry. Okay. And us as humans, we're designed to get rid of distress as quickly as possible. We don't like to be uncomfortable at all. We like to maintain a state of what we call homeostasis. So naturally, we engage in some sort of behavior to get rid of that distress, right? And we call that a safety behavior, or in the OCD world, you can call it a compulsion. So when is this pandemic going to be over, causing some anxiety and fear? You're like, oh, this is uncomfortable. All right, I'm going to check the news. Right? I'm going to check the news. Let's see if there's any updates.
That's me, man. That's me.
Totally. It's like, all right, let me just pull up my phone. Let's go on Twitter. CNN saying this, Fox is saying this, MSNBC is saying this. We might find that news source that's like, okay, sources are saying this can be done in June or July. Yeah. And it's like, okay, I have an answer. Whew. All right, we're good. We're good. And we're sitting around, we're feeling that relief a little bit. However, we're sitting there again, and that doubt sets in, or that what if sets in. What if that news source wasn't right? Right? Triggers another thought just out of nowhere, pops into our head. And then, oh my God, this is scary. I need to go check again. I need to go check the news. I need to go, talk to people to see what their opinions are of it. We call that like reassurance seeking. One other thing I wanted to add, anxiety itself feeds on uncertainty. So you can think of this vicious anxiety cycle as an endless quest for certainty. So anxiety is fed by not knowing things. And we go on these, you could say, meaningless scavenger hunts, to find certainty. And it just keeps us stuck in this. And it sucks because when you're stuck in this, that prevents you from, being present in life.
Especially with your background, I was really thinking about this last night, because you had mentioned, obviously, you deal with specialized anxiety, OCD, stuff like that, stuff that we've been talking about. But you also, naturally, as a group therapist for like the marriage and family setting, I know that I've seen a lot of, I can't even say news, but obviously you would assume that people with like a very tense household, if there's any sort of like abuse or domestic violence, that's like a really sensitive thing to cope with, like at this moment. Is that like a more severe scenario? Are you advising your clients in a different way because you cannot physically like get a moment of reprieve from like your spouse or your family if you're in the same house?
Yeah, in like an abusive household, verbally abusive, physically abusive. It's tricky because, domestic violence, we know cases are increasing. It's really sad because a lot of these kids and a lot of these, victims of domestic violence typically would go to school as a reprieve. They'd get out of their house.
Oh gosh.
They'd go to work to get out of their house, and we always, if there's domestic violence going on, we always recommend the domestic violence hotline, 911. And on our end, if we know that there's, child abuse going on, we're mandated to report that.
Yeah.
We have to report to a DCFS or CPS. So luckily, me personally, none of my patients have experienced that. Maybe more so the population I work with isn't so much in that realm. Even without domestic violence cases, I mean, people living in close quarters are going to have conflict, regardless of a quarantine or not.
Yeah.
Add on a quarantine. I mean, you live with your girlfriend,
Yeah.
and I live with my fiance, and I'd be lying if I said that we haven't had conflict. Conflict is not a bad thing, right? It's how you work through it. It's how you talk. It's how you respectfully disagree and argue with one another. There's like
Healthy conflict.
Exactly. There's like fair fighting rules, working with couples, working with, I work a lot with something called relationship OCD, which is like a subtype of OCD where someone's constantly doubting and obsessing about their relationship. So a part of that treatment is teaching, effective communication.
Yeah.
And how to appropriately communicate your concerns rather than like blaming the person, name calling.
So even for Ceci and I, which we were all in the same dorm floor. That's how I met her. I think for us, it's very much like we try to, as you said, the best we can sort of have healthy conflict.
Yeah.
But we've also like found our comfort zone of like what's below the belt. Because sometimes she'll just end up being like, I totally just took that out on you. I'm not even mad at you type thing.
Totally.
And then other times it's sort of like if we are bickering, which is very light respectively, we kind of know like, okay, we can only go so far.
Right.
Beyond the point where it's no longer productive to like say this or something like that.
Totally. Well, it's important going back to that fight or flight response. When we're triggered and angry, that's the same response in play. We're just like total energy, kind of like caveman-y brains going at each other. So if you're super triggered, you're going to say some stuff that you really don't mean and regret. Right.
Yeah, 100%.
So when it's okay to, if you notice one of you or both of you are getting to that point of like, basically caveman brain.
Yeah.
It's appropriate to take a step away from the part. It's important to remember, I mean, I don't think I said this earlier. The fight or flight response can only last physically for up to 60 to 90 minutes because it uses so much energy that our body cannot physically maintain that state. So go take a break, walk away from each other, cool off, and then come back and talk about it because nothing is going to get solved in that fight or flight response.
To her credit, which I really do have to point this out, we don't get in very tense arguments. It's usually about very small things.
Yeah.
But I think, now that you say that, my immediate reaction is let's talk and see this conversation through until we see the other end of it. Right. And hers, which I now know is probably more clinically responsible, is to just like, give me a break. Yeah. But for me, I'm like, what do you mean break? Like, let's just figure this out like right now.
Well, and that ties it back to, we like to know things. We like certainty.
Yeah. No,
so we want to 100%. Solve. So sitting in that uncomfortable of not having a resolution sucks. And it's important to know, finding certainty and having answers is also evolutionarily appropriate. We like to know things. It keeps us safe. Like having a schedule, having a routine is comforting. However, if we get so rigid and like need to know things and are just so uncomfortable with that gray area, then that's a problem.
Yeah. Oh man. Okay. This is a great transition because one of the biggest questions I wanted to ask, probably relative to me and just a lot of different people that I've spoken with, friends and whoever, are actual like habits and routines like completely essential, or do you feel like this is a time where, okay, maybe I can loosen the reins, I can be a bit lazy or gluttonous, or just kind of do things to tune the world out for a second? Like, is it absolutely crucial from a mental standpoint to maintain a routine, or is it okay to kind of slip into, let me just drown the world out for a sec? Because that's been me. Sometimes I'll like dig into a video game or whatever. What do you think about that?
It's a really good question. And again, I don't think there is a solid one set answer, like an absolute answer. I think it's a case by case basis. With all my patients, I've been kind of giving a general rule of thumb of, yes, consistency, routine, scheduling is important. We need structure in some way, shape, or form. Depending on the person, they may need more structure than others, right? Following a routine of, let me back up. This quarantine is not going to last forever. So eventually we're going to return to some sort of normalcy and get back to our day-to-day.
Yeah.
And if we get used to not doing anything, if we're just sitting around all day, that transition is going to fucking suck. You don't have to create such a rigid schedule where it's like at 9 a.m. I am waking up every single day, and at 9:05 I am out of bed. At
Yeah.
9:10 I am showering till 9:15, right? It's kind of about creating a skeleton. It's important to do things during the day that make you feel productive and accomplished. Whether that's for some people that could be, getting, if they're working from home, doing their work, or if they're, doing online, distance learning, school, doing
Yeah.
their schoolwork, that could be enough for them. It's really important at the end of the day when you kind of, put your head on the pillow to feel like, okay, I did something today, and
Yeah.
that's going to be crucial for your mental health. Now, it's also okay to, if you want to have a day of just like, all right, I'm feeling a little lazy. Sure, let's play some games. Let's play some video games. Let's just kind of mess around. That's totally fine. It's really case by case because it depends on how it's affecting your mood, right?
Oh, that's such a good point.
Everybody's
Okay.
different. Everybody has different levels of what bothers them, what doesn't bother them. We know, research shows that when we are productive, when we are moving, we tend to feel better. It gives us less time to sit in our own thoughts and go down to dark places, which is really common, especially with all the uncertainty going on. So a kind of trap that we fall in as humans is we wait until we feel a certain way or think in a certain way before we do something. Okay. Now,
Oof.
it's like, oh, I don't feel like doing my homework right now, so I'm not going to do it. I don't feel like exercising right now, so I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
And so the school of therapy that I work out of is called cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy has a thing called the functional triangle.
Okay.
Okay. And what the functional triangle is basically how we function as humans. We function off three basic things. We have our thoughts, our behaviors, and our feelings. And they're all birelational, meaning the way we think influences the way we feel. The way we feel influences the way we think. Thoughts influence behaviors all the way around. The thing about this is only one of these things are in our direct control. And a lot of people, think that we have control over what we think, when in reality, we don't. Thoughts can just pop into our mind, against our will. And, that can be uncomfortable. And we try to control our thoughts. But when we try to not think about something, you think about it more. And feelings also, you can't turn on an emotion or turn off an emotion, right? I can't just tell you to get as mad as you've ever been right now when I snap my finger, right?
Dang. So it really is just like if you, on some level, come to terms with you're going to think a certain way, you're going to feel a certain way, but you can only really mitigate the behavior.
Correct. So that's where the behavior comes into play, is we really only have control over what we do. If I told you to stand up, you could right now. If I told you to clap your hands, you could. So going back to, waiting until we feel a certain way,
Yeah.
or thinking a certain way, that's kind of like putting the cart before the horse, in terms of like you're waiting for the cart to move, being your thoughts and feelings, before the horse is going to move, which is impossible.
Yeah.
So putting your behaviors first, doing things despite how you're feeling or thinking, is actually what's going to drag those thoughts and feelings, and it's going to positively impact them. You're going to feel better. Your thoughts are going to shift.
But it really is like you push past resistance, you learn and assume the behavior, and then the thoughts and feelings trail afterwards.
Exactly. And
That's
it's
so.
obvious.
That's a
Yeah,
really
go
good
ahead.
point, dude. I just
Yeah.
want to say that.
And the thing is, the concept's like simple to think about,
Yeah.
but in reality, emotions get so heavy and our thoughts can be so debilitating. It's so hard to create space for all of that. You just want to feel comfortable. So
Yeah.
any sense of discomfort, you're like, hell no, get away from me, please. It basically like someone who's coughing, go away.
Yeah.
So it is really crucial to, lead by behaviors versus letting your thoughts and emotions control you.
All right. So one of my bigger things is, okay, so like the initial shock of quarantine completely faded,
Right.
like we're aware that infection rates going up, testing's going up. So in my mind, I feel like it's a different mental hurdle to process. There's not the initial shock. Now it's more like what's on the horizon now that I've adjusted to this level of normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's worrying people is sort of, one, we don't understand timeline, understandable.
Yeah.
But two, when it is quote unquote safe or deemed safe to go back to normal, like as you kind of pointed earlier, how do you even prepare for that, knowing that it could come any point? Imagine like you're working from home on a Friday, or let's say you were furloughed, unfortunately, something like that.
Yeah.
And then like on a Monday, like, oh crap, I got to set my alarm for 8:30. I'm going back into work. Like
Right.
it must be a weird adjustment to kind of mentally deal with.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that ties into that, obviously uncertainty and change, right? Any sort of change is super uncomfortable for people. It's important to understand that we're creatures of habit. We like things to be consistent. We like to know our routine. We just like to know in general.
Yeah.
It's comforting. So, yeah, that transition back, regardless of how prepared you are, is going to be weird. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's important to go into that knowing that, having the expectation that this is going to be weird. This is going to be uncomfortable. And, we could go back into work on a Monday, and by Thursday cases spiked. And again, we're back in quarantine.
Weird cycle that would be.
It sounds like that is likely. I don't know. Because they talk about a second wave. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
not my field, but
We're just taking it a day at a time at this point, man.
That's why going back to like having a set routine, schedule type stuff is important, because that will make the transitions easier. It's important to, I think we'll get into ways to, cope with this, but just real quick, it's important to know what you have control over and things you don't have control over. And you working with the things you do have control over, like scheduling, routine, that can help create some sort of comfort.
To just kind of tie everything together, I realize that you might have a few sort of key pointers, at least something to think about when you're a little bit more stressed out, or things to keep in mind. So whether it's your own personal perspective or more so on a, completely empirical mental health perspective, just what do you feel is the best course of action sort of on a day-to-day level, or just to keep your mind in the right place?
Yeah. So I think for me, I'm going to speak both like clinically and my own experiences, because I try to practice what I preach.
Everyone does.
Everyone does. And obviously I'm not perfect at it. Yeah. And that leads me to self-compassion.
That's a good word.
Yes. Self-compassion. And well, let me back up before self-compassion. So mindfulness is a tool that we use a lot in treatment. And mindfulness is thrown around all the time. I think a lot of people have a lot of different, thoughts about mindfulness, what it is, what it isn't. But the way we talk about it and the way I use it and embrace it is basically just being present in the moment and noticing what's happening without judgment. All it really is like, okay, like what's happening around me? What am I feeling emotionally? What am I feeling physically? And not really, placing any judgmental words on it. It's not like I'm feeling bad, I'm feeling good. It's just, I notice I'm feeling anxious right now. I notice I'm feeling a little unhappy right now. Or, I notice that physically I'm feeling tired.
So you feel like it's healthy to be able to sit in that and just not have to like process it. You just kind of let it be type scenario. Is that the best way to put it?
Exactly. That's actually a really great way to put it. Whenever we try, it goes back to that functional triangle. Whenever we try to push away certain thoughts or feelings, they come back harder tenfold. The accepting that it's going to be uncomfortable, acceptance, the mindfulness, allowing it to be there without, judging it or trying to rid yourself of it is super important. And that brings me to the self-compassion piece, because you're not going to be perfect at it.
No,
we are humans, and emotions are really hard to deal with sometimes. Sometimes you get so heated. You were talking about like, sometimes with you and Ceci, you'll fight and you just like, I need to fix this.
Yeah,
right?
100%.
Yeah. And it's like, you have this sense of urgency, when in reality, if you are able to take a step back and just notice what's happening around you without getting so entangled, entrenched in it, trying to control everything, actually going to be more beneficial for you. And that ties into a fight or flight response can really only last for up to 60 to 90 minutes. So if you're able to just kind of sit not engage in any sort of behavior to try and rid yourself of that distress, and instead embrace that distress and let it sit and be there. We call it distress tolerance, our ability to tolerate uncomfortable situations and distress. So the longer you're able to do that and build your distress tolerance muscle, the better off you're going to be. Not just with anxiety, not just with OCD stuff, but just life in general, the ups and downs, the uncertainty of life. You know, we place expectations on how things should be, shouldn't be. We have no ability to kind of predict what's going to happen. So learning to roll with it is going to be your best bet. And that's what, you know, that's the ultimate goal of treatment, to tolerate uncertainty. And the type of therapy, you know, I do is called exposure and response prevention. And what that is you expose yourself to the things that make you worried. And the response prevention piece is not engaging in any of those safety behaviors or compulsions to rewire that fight or flight to say like, oh, the situation's actually not that bad. Like, I can handle this.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. And it's scary. You do it gradually, you know? So someone who's worried about speaking in front of a class, you do it gradually of, you know, imagining speaking in front of a class, maybe speaking in front of your therapist, speaking in front of 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, until eventually you do speak in front of a class. And the process of your anxiety going down over time is called habituation. Basically, it's rewiring your fight or flight. You're learning it's not actually that bad. So regardless of, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
That's pretty applicable to most things you'd be scared of.
Exactly. That's why, like, what's the saying? Face your fears.
Yeah. Or like, what's another one? Like, the only way out is through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's so cliche and cheesy, but it's true.
Yeah.
Like me personally, like I have OCD, and, you know, I did exposure therapy, and it was fucking hard.
I can't imagine, dude. I really can't.
Yeah, like I got so anxious that I threw up during one of my sessions. And, you know, it happens, but I was able to do it. And I'm a much more flexible, stronger person because of it.
Before I ask about, you know, the tips that you would prescribe to people, apart from anything else you want to say,
yeah,
apart from your personal life, is it harder to be a mental health practitioner right now? Because I never really thought, like, okay, what about the actual therapists who they themselves have their own lives? I can imagine that the mental load is a bit heavier than usual. Have you done a okay job of like compartmentalizing that, or have you really been like, all right, people are really going through shit right now?
Well, that's where it kind of ties back to the mindfulness, self-compassion piece, is because obviously we want to do the best at our jobs and we want to be able to help people. And some days we're just not feeling it. You know, we're not in the best headspace, and being able to be aware of that as you're giving, you know, as you're doing therapy is appropriate. You know, I would say as a mental health professional, the tools that I do prescribe and everything, and the tools that I use myself, I think have helped me get through this.
Yeah.
And there are days that are for sure harder than others. I think for me personally, you know, I'm lucky enough to have a really good support system around me. And, you know, when I am feeling drained,
yeah,
you know, utilizing all of that, you know, talking to my family, talking to my fiance, just exercising, like any sort of thing to kind of boost that mood again. It's not allowing your emotions and thoughts to control you. It's leading with behaviors. Doing is so important. And yeah, and sometimes you do just end up laying in bed and are just like, F it.
And I know you, man, laying in bed is probably also playing NHL.
Exactly. Playing shell. I think when we were on NHL 14 or 15 at that point.
Dude, 13.
Was it 13? Oh my God. When we first started. Oh my God. Whew. That was back when the Kings were good.
Yeah. It was right around the time. That's when we won the cup, right?
Yeah. They won 2012 and 2014. So the year we were juniors, they won. And then ever since then, it's been kind of downhill. But that's a topic for a different YouTube video. As, you know, a mental health professional, I'm also a diehard LA Kings fan. So we can have a whole...
Yeah, this man is a hockey buff. He introduced me to NHL, which I still play to this day.
Yes. Did you have 20? Or do you have,
let me see. I have 19. I don't have 20.
Okay. It's honestly like the same game. It hasn't changed
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah, there hasn't been any big shifts in it, but it's a great game.
All right, man. Final thoughts. I'm so sorry I kept you so long, but this has been
Oh, dude,
great.
this has really been great. I hope you can like. I imagine you're not going to post this whole thing. I hope you can like cut it to like good, or I don't really know. Like, what are you
I'll
gonna?
try to cut to like the most poignant pieces, hopefully.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because it's. I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff in here that's good, and it's been really fun.
Yeah,
Um,
man.
so, just like tips to get through this, I think the mindfulness piece is super important. Mindfulness, self-compassion, noticing, when you're starting to spiral, catching yourself, and redirecting your attention is really important. With mindfulness, there's a bunch of different exercises you can do by engaging your five senses: your sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell.
Mm.
So if you notice that you are spinning, it's appropriate to kind of sit, look around the room, name five things that you see, name four things that you can touch and feel, three things that you can smell, three things that you can hear, two things that you can smell, and one thing you can taste. It actually will help bring you back into the room and redirect from kind of ruminating up here.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah, it's called
Wow,
the
that's
five senses
crazy.
exercise. Ask Ceci about it. I'm sure she's heard of that, something similar
Probably.
to it. There's a whole bunch of variations of it. For example, like when I was in treatment, the exercise I would do all the time is I really like sound. That's my like favorite sense. So
Yeah.
I would just, put a timer on for a couple minutes. I'd start out when I first started out only like 30 seconds because that's all I could handle because my thoughts were just racing.
Yeah.
But I built up to being able to do it for like 10 minutes at a time, and you could just sit and notice all the sounds that are coming in, what you're hearing, the birds outside, traffic going by. And whenever your mind starts to wander, whenever the thoughts come in, because they will,
Yeah.
we don't have control over the thoughts that pop in our mind. That's super important. You just gently you notice it, like, okay, I'm starting to drift a little bit. I'm going to redirect my attention back to what I'm hearing, what I'm touching, what I'm looking at, right?
Yeah.
And I think another great exercise, mindfulness wise, is mindfulness walks. It kind of kills two birds with one stone. You get some exercise, and it helps you ground you and make you more present. And what a mindfulness walk is just literally going on a walk while intentionally paying attention to what's going on around you. A lot of people like to focus on the sight. So picking a color and naming everything that you see that is that color. So, if you pick red, you're like, oh, there's roses, there's a fire truck, there's, a red house, and just doing that throughout the whole walk.
That's crazy how simple that seems. Like, does it feel coerced at first? Like, you're kind of like, all right, I'm going to force myself to do this.
It
Then
does.
when you do it, you're like, okay, this helps type thing.
Totally. And everything that I'm talking about, all these skills, mindfulness, I'll talk about some more after this, but you need to do them repeatedly. Okay. Like I said, we're creatures of habit. We learn through doing.
Yeah.
It's like riding a bike. When you first start, it's really uncomfortable. You fall a couple times, you get back up, and then eventually it's second nature. So the more you're able to learn and do these skills, the easier they're going to come to you and the better they're going to work.
Makes sense. But
Yeah,
it's like a mental muscle in that capacity.
Exactly. Like a mindfulness muscle, that distress tolerance muscle. I have so many patients come in, they're like, I did the mindfulness exercise. It didn't work. I was like, how many times you do it? Once. Like, really?
It's a litmus test. You're like, you just didn't try enough.
Mindfulness itself is not supposed to reduce your anxiety. Okay. It's not an exercise. All the stuff that I'm talking about isn't necessarily supposed to give you that really quick relief, because that's not what it's about. It's about learning to tolerate distress and sit with discomfort. Okay. So mindfulness helps you be more aware of what's going on around you without kind of distracting yourself or trying to push things away. Because going back to that vicious cycle, trying to distract yourself is like a safety behavior to get that temporary relief. We want to learn to sit in that uncomfortableness, that sit in that shit, pretty much. That smelly shit.
That is okay.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to put this, because this is probably one of the most topical and sensible pieces of advice.
Yeah. So it's about learning to sit in that distress. If you think about it, our distress tolerance right now as a society is awful. Anytime we're uncomfortable, here's my phone. All right, let's go scroll Facebook. Let's go on Snapchat. Let's go on Instagram. Or let's go on the computer. Let's watch, some trashy reality TV show to distract.
Yeah.
So, and I am total victim of this. Like, I do it too. I know when I'm doing it, and I'm like, okay, like, put the phone down. Let's sit in this. And yeah, so it really is about learning to sit in the shit.
I appreciate you being able to really articulate what a lot of people are feeling, for sure.
Yeah. And just a couple other, I mean, if you don't mind, just like one or two other
Please.
tips. Yeah. So ruminating endlessly. So what ruminating is basically this endless search in your head for an answer to something that's unanswerable. It's a tricky thing because you feel productive doing it because you're doing something.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, this is good. I'm doing something. But really it keeps that cycle going because it gives you a false sense of certainty. So a tool that I love and use myself all the time is something called worry time. Now worry time is this 15-minute worry time. So what you do is you literally sit down with a 15-minute timer and you take a pen to paper, not typing, not on your phone, pen to paper, of writing down all your worries for 15 minutes straight. Okay. So the structure of this is basically like, I am worried that we'll be in quarantine forever. I am worried that I'll get COVID-19. I'm worried that, I'll lose my job. Now, what worry time isn't, it's not rumination time. So you're not writing, I'm worried I'm going to lose my job because of this, and this, and this, and this, and writing out all the evidence. It's literally just writing your worries without going down that rabbit hole. Okay. And this is helpful for a couple different reasons. One, it gives you a set time to worry. So someone who would consider themselves a worrywart or a ruminator, you can schedule 3, 4, 5 worry times a day for 15 minutes at a time. Now, this is really important because it allows you, when you're just going day to day, maybe you're doing your job, maybe you're, with your friends, and you start noticing that ruminating going on, it's helpful to be like, okay, I noticed that. I'm going to redirect my attention back to what I'm doing. I know I have worry time scheduled at 5 o'clock, so I'm going to save it till then. Right. And the more we're able to do that, the more we're able to build that muscle, the better, the more able we're going to be able to stay present in the moment with people.
The one thing that I've heard about rumination or just having like obsessive thoughts, however which way you want to label it, is I heard one person say, not a therapist, by the way, this is not advice. You're the one giving advice here. But he's just like, I try to think of it like he's sitting in a movie theater and all the thoughts that he has no control over, he's just eating popcorn, watching his thoughts go by, telling himself he's got nothing to do with his thoughts. He can only control like what he does.
Yeah.
Is that like on par or is that a little too lofty?
No. That's honestly like, I like it because it's really simple.
Yeah.
And that's the general principle of it with like mindfulness too, especially it's being an observer of what's happening. So it's not like you're going along for the ride with the thoughts. It's like sitting back as the thoughts go by, as the feelings go by, not trying to make them go faster or slower, but just literally allowing them to be there.
Man, thank you so much. It was first good to catch up. I haven't spoken in so long, man. But also just to hear your perspective on this whole situation with your background and your specialty, I feel can really be helpful for people to just keep in mind. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I would love to come back on. I know we were talked about doing like an in-person thing way before this whole COVID thing started.
Which we will still do. We're going to get more in depth. It's going to be sort of like more of an AMA type scenario, more of a character profile, which I hope you're still down for.
That sounds great.
Awesome.
That sounds really cool, man.
Well, thank you so much, bro. I'm going to go ahead and the recording and then,
All right. Very cool. Bye, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found Andrew's advice as valuable for you as I did for myself. I wanted to quickly mention that he actually offers a free coronavirus support group, and they meet twice a week on Zoom, which I've linked down below in the description. Also, just kind of let me know how you felt about videos like this in general. I actually have a lot of videos planned in the future where I get to really kind of dig into someone's background, ask them about their story and how they ended up in their respective fields. Of course, when it's sort of safe to do so. As always, please give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Let me know about your thoughts and your feedback in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.